Over the past handful of weeks, I've seen different rumors and reports, not from any official news sources, but talking about how James Gunn may be interested in integrating Robert Pattinson's Batman, Matt Reeves' Batman into the DCU. And those rumors were then fueled because not long after it was reported that the Batman Part 2 was being delayed because the script needed to be reworked or whatever. And that began connecting some dots that maybe it's because Matt Reeves is now trying to connect the Batman Part 2 into James Gunn's DCU and not just a standalone separate Batman, right? And that kind of makes sense because from a business standpoint, you're trying to build something. Having two standalone Batman movies almost compete against one another. Like, you already have a Batman that works, that people love, that movie is very well received, and then you got to go and try and do it again. Like, it's just not the best idea. But with that, I've also seen a lot of pushback and backlash saying, no, Batman Part 2, Robert Pattinson's Batman, it's supposed to be grounded, it's supposed to be real and realistic. It can't fit into the DCU because the DCU it's got magic and aliens and all this crazy stuff. Robert Pattinson's Batman doesn't fit into that. And I would like to submit to you that there's a chance it could work. And so here's my idea of how you can actually make Robert Pattinson's Batman fit into the DCU. First off, we have to address, kind of like I alluded to earlier, the clashing between the realistic take of the Penguin and the Batman Part 1 with what it appears James Gunn is setting up in his DCU, right? Like, there seems to be a conflict of tone and a conflict of world building there. And it makes us think that Batman has to be a realistic character. He has to be grounded. But if you really look at like the lore and the mythos of Batman, he's not a character that has to be grounded. I think that's very much Chris Nolan's Dark Knight trilogy influence on the culture. And those movies are great and they worked for what they were, but it almost like made people think that Batman has to fit into this box of grounded reality, realistic. And to me, that actually hinders the character more than it allows us to like explore creative options. Batman has a lot of crazy villains that don't really make sense realistically. Like, if we stick with that realistic tone, we'll never see Killer Croc. We'll never see, despite what people may theorize and suggest, we'll never see a Mr. Freeze. We'll never see characters that are really popular in his rogues gallery because they have to be realistic. I just don't think that is fun. I don't think that's creative. And I actually think there is a way with Matt Reeves' Batman where you can start that way, but it doesn't have to stay that way. So we obviously know that things were very grounded, very realistic in the first of the Batman movie. But I don't think it needs to stay that way. I think you can start slowly introducing subtle and slightly progressively more supernatural elements into this movie so that it builds towards when Batman is interacting with Superman and Darkseid eventually and whatever characters in this DCU, that it kind of makes sense. It doesn't feel super jarring and crazy. So I think you can introduce, like, there's rumors about Clayface being in the next movie. Like, we don't got to do the super old original, like, it's just a guy with mask. Like, why not introduce a little bit more of a supernatural character version of Clayface? I think that's going to make things a little bit more interesting. You separate it from the Dark Knight, but also not making it goofy like the 90s movies, right? I think that there's a way to really, really do it well by slowly introducing the supernatural into this movie so that when you take Batman outside of his movies, outside of the Matt Reeves movies, and he's interacting with other characters in the DCU, it doesn't feel random, it doesn't feel off because we've seen them interact in the supernatural before. And you may be thinking, this won't work, that'll never work, but we actually have seen this work before. Obviously, Iron Man, the first Iron Man movie, is you're suspending your disbelief a little bit more than maybe for Matt Reeves' The Batman. But I would say that there's a level of similarity there where the first Iron Man movie, they try to ground it and make it as realistic as possible, but slowly they introduce more supernatural elements, more crazier ideas, so that by the time that the Avengers rolls around, we see Tony interacting with aliens and Norse gods and things like that. It's not as far-fetched because we've seen it slowly work its way towards that, right? We slowly over time developed our suspension of disbelief with this character. And I think you can take a very similar approach with Robert Pattinson's The Batman. Because when we saw Tony Stark in the first Avengers movie, it didn't feel crazy. It didn't feel weird. It was honestly satisfying and cool. And so if we want to see Robert Pattinson's Batman take down some parademons, I actually don't think it will feel random or out of left field. I think it'll be really cool. I think it'll actually be really satisfying because we get to see representation from this corner of the gritty and grounded corner of the DCU now get to be on one of the big teams, get to be on the main stage. I think that would just be really, really satisfying and cool for the audiences. I really do think that this could work. I don't think it makes sense to try and introduce another Batman. You already have one that works. The world they've set up right now doesn't conflict with what it seems like James Gunn is going for. I know that there's the shot of Batman and Creature Commandos. Honestly, it's animated. It was a shadow. It ain't that big of a deal. I think that could still be Robert Pattinson's Batman, if I'm being honest. But I don't think that you have to change Batman or Gotham, right? That's what people, myself included, love so much about the Penguin show and the first Batman movie. It was such a clever, such a satisfying writing of the characters and world building. You don't have to change that. But I think you can change what the world around that looks like. And I think that's okay. And I don't think it hinders the enjoyment of what Matt Reeves has brought to that character in that world. So, let me know what you think. Could this work? Could we actually see Robert Pattinson's Batman introduced to the DCU? Or do you want absolutely nothing to do with that? You're like, keep them separate. I want my Reeves-verse here, and I want my James Gunn universe over here. Let me know what you think. Deuce keys, homies.